The first thing I noticed was her eyes, bright, glowing, almost unnatural. Not the amber of a wild animal, but the unnatural, synthetic sheen of someone who didn't belong to this world. My world. She was lying next to me, her skin like marble in the dim light, a smooth, faint glow tracing her curves, like a reflection of the stars themselves. My name is Leo. That's all you need to know for now. Everything else is too complicated, too tangled up in how I ended up here, in this damn situation, with her. I could feel her breath on my neck, slow and deep. I should have been terrified, but instead I just felt drawn to her. She was nothing like the women I'd known. She wasn't human, obviously. She was something far worse, or perhaps far better. Are you awake? Her voice was low, barely a whisper, but it sent chills down my spine. The tone held curiosity, but also something more. I turned my head just enough to meet her gaze. I couldn't help it. Her beauty was hypnotic, the way her lips curved into a soft smile that was simultaneously innocent and dangerous. And those eyes, fierce, intelligent, and strangely knowing, like she could see straight through me, to places I didn't even want to acknowledge. Why are you here? I asked, my voice raspy from the night we'd spent together. The way she looked at me, that was the problem. Her smile deepened. You wanted me here. I could feel her fingers ghosting over my chest, light as a breeze but leaving behind a trail of heat. My heart hammered in my chest. Part of me screamed to push her away, to get out of this situation, but another part, the part one hated, urged me to pull her closer. The last thing I remembered was finding her at the edge of the forest, her ship lying in ruins, fire licking the air around her. She was unconscious at first. When she woke, it wasn't fear in her eyes, no, not fear at all. It was something colder. Hunger. And I had no clue how to handle it. You can't exactly tell someone you just met that you're human and completely out of your depth. You don't tell an alien to back off when she's taller than you, stronger than you, and not afraid to use her teeth. What do you want from me? I asked again, though the words felt weak in my mouth. Her fingers curled around my wrist, sending a shockwave through my body. She wasn't gentle, but her grip was sure. I want you to stop pretending that you're in control. I shifted, heart pounding. I didn't know what to think, let alone what to feel. I had been in control, until she showed up. I'm not pretending, I muttered. I'm not in control, not anymore. She smirked, reading me like a book, flipping each page with calculated precision. I know. That's the problem. I didn't understand what she meant, but her touch burned through my chest, making my head spin. I didn't ask for this. The words felt weak, pathetic even. I didn't know who I was trying to convince, her or myself. Her gaze softened, just for a moment, before the coldness returned. You may not have asked, but you wanted it. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was right, in some ways. I hadn't asked for an alien to crash into my life, but I'd seen her. I couldn't deny it, there was an undeniable draw. A pull. A pull that didn't make any sense. It wasn't just physical either. Something else. Something that made me feel like I was drowning and flying at the same time. I couldn't escape her. And I didn't want to. You're not what I thought you'd be, I said, my voice quieter now, almost a confession. You're not like any of the stories. Her lips parted in an amused smile, the kind you give someone when they've said something so naive it almost makes you pity them. No. I'm much more. She paused, her eyes flicking to the window, the moonlight spilling in from the glass. And you're much less than I expected. I didn't like the sound of that. What's that supposed to mean? She sat up, the silk sheets sliding off her body like liquid, revealing her full figure. Alien, yes. But magnificent. Her movements were fluid, like water, powerful and graceful at the same time. You're weak, Leo, she said, her voice lower now. The calmness in her words didn't match the sharpness in her eyes. And you're not just weak in the physical sense. I sat up, too, suddenly very aware of how close we were. The silence between us stretched, thick with the weight of her unspoken thoughts. You don't even know what you want, do you? She asked, her voice just above a whisper, teasing yet sincere. I clenched my fists. You're the one who came here. Not me. You found me. She reached out, brushing her fingers against my cheek, sending a current through my veins. You think I found you? No. You called me. Her voice dropped even lower, more intimate. Whether you like it or not, Leo, you've always called me. Her words hit me like a punch. I didn't. I don't need your permission, she interrupted, her gaze turning cold, predatory even. You're human, Leo. A fascinating, fragile thing. And you'll help me learn. Teach me everything I need to know. My pulse quickened. Help you? You're not going to. Oh, Leo, you misunderstand. You're going to show me. In every way. My breath caught. Whatever it wasn't what I'd expected. Not in the least. Before I could respond, her lips were on mine, and my entire body went still, unsure whether I should fight or surrender. But as her kiss deepened, a part of me, a part one didn't want to admit even to myself, wanted to let go. This wasn't just about her. It was about me too. Something had shifted between us, and whether I liked it or not, I had been pulled into her world. A world I wasn't ready for, but a world I might never escape. The tension rose again, thick as ever, as her body pressed against mine, igniting a fire in my veins. And then it hit me. I couldn't get away. And I didn't want to. I woke to a silence that felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. Her scent still lingered on the sheets, faint and intoxicating, a blend of metal and something softer, something alien. The space beside me was cold, the absence of her warmth a stark reminder that the night hadn't been a dream. It had been real. Too real. My head ached as I sat up, pushing myself off the bed, but a wave of dizziness hit me, and I steadied myself against the wall. My body had become a map of her touch, each place she'd pressed against me, burned into my skin. I couldn't erase it. I didn't know if I wanted to. I ran a hand through my hair and glanced at the clock. Late afternoon. She wasn't in the room, but the faint hum of something mechanical, distant, reached my ears. The sound reminded me of her ship, though I wasn't sure why I was still thinking of it. I needed to focus. I needed to figure out how to make sense of what had happened last night. Why had she come to me? What was it about me, a simple human, that made her choose this? And more importantly, what did she want from me? I stood and moved toward the living room, half expecting her to be waiting there, watching me, her glowing eyes calculating, always calculating. Instead, I found a message on the table, a small device blinking red, the only thing that suggested her presence in the room. I didn't hesitate. I picked it up, and the moment my fingers brushed the surface, her voice filled the air. You're still thinking too much, Leo. I warned you. I swallowed hard. What is this? I muttered to the empty room, as though asking the question could make sense of everything. Listen carefully. Her voice continued, her tone as calm as ever. You want to know why I'm here. I'm not just a visitor, Leo. I'm sent. My mission, she paused, her voice sharp, is to learn from you. To study humans. A shiver ran down my spine. Study me? The silence that followed stretched long and heavy. My mind reeled with possibilities, none of them good. There was no, just, studying when it came to her. I knew that much. And how do you plan to do that? I asked aloud, though I wasn't expecting an answer. By understanding you. And by making you understand me. I dropped the device back onto the table. I felt like I was losing control, like every moment we spent together was pulling me deeper into a game I didn't know the rules of. She was right. I had no idea what I was getting into. The door opened behind me, and I spun around. There she was, standing in the doorway, her presence as commanding as ever. You heard? She asked, her gaze flicking to the blinking device on the table. Enough, I replied, my voice tinged with frustration. Enough to know you're not here for just a visit. You want something more from me, don't you? She took a slow step forward, eyes never leaving mine. You think I want something from you? I nodded. You're not here to study me, are you? Her lips quirked into a knowing smile, but it was her eyes, those damn eyes, that unnerved me. They gleamed with something more than amusement. What makes you think I don't want something from you, Leo? Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication, and my heart stuttered. She was close now, too close. I could feel the heat radiating off her body, the proximity amplifying every nerve in my skin. I didn't want to admit it, but my body was reacting, betraying me with every beat of my heart. My pulse quickened, and though I wanted to keep my distance, I didn't move away. You're playing with fire, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I am. Her smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something almost unreadable. But then it was gone, and she was back to being the enigma I couldn't seem to crack. Oh, Leo, she whispered, her voice softer now, almost tender. I know everything about you. And what I don't know, I'm going to learn. I don't need to be human to understand you. A flicker of confusion passed through me, but I didn't have time to process it before she took another step, closing the distance between us. My breath caught in my throat as she reached up to brush her fingers against my cheek. Her touch was impossibly soft, like silk, but the force behind it? That was something else entirely. You're weak, Leo, she murmured, almost as if she were savoring the words. And I'm going to teach you how to be strong. I pulled back, suddenly feeling a swell of anger that pushed through the haze she'd created. You don't get to say that to me. You don't. Her hand shot out, catching my wrist in a grip that was too tight, too precise. I do get to say that. She interrupted, her voice cold, though her eyes were alight with something darker. I get to say whatever I want. My pulse raced as she held me in place, her body pressed against mine in a way that made it impossible to ignore how much I wanted to break away, and how much I didn't. My head spun, and a voice deep inside me screamed to get away, to push her out of my life before I lost myself completely. But then she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I could make you fight me, Leo. But that's not what I want. I jerked my wrist out of her grasp, the sudden movement breaking whatever strange spell she had over me. What do you want then? I asked, my voice strained, caught somewhere between fear and something darker. She tilted her head, studying me. What I want is to show you what you're capable of. And what I can offer you. The words lingered in the air, her meaning clear enough, though I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. She wasn't here to break me. She was here to rebuild me. Into something else? The air between us thickened, charged with unspoken tension, and I realized that I had no idea what I was about to do. But I knew one thing, whatever this was, I wasn't prepared for it. And there was no going back. Let's see how far you can go, Leo, she said, her smile colder now. I'm only just beginning. I watched as she turned, her movements fluid and almost hypnotic, her gaze never leaving mine. And then, just like that, she was gone, leaving me to wonder what the hell I had gotten myself into. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. I barely remembered the days that passed, each one slipping by in a haze of uncertainty, frustration, and desire. I hated how easily she wormed her way into my thoughts, like an itch I couldn't scratch. The things she said, the way she looked at me, it all gnawed at me in a way I couldn't shake. I was being torn apart, piece by piece, but I wasn't sure if I was fighting it anymore. Her presence was everywhere. Even when she wasn't physically in the room, I could feel her, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I didn't want to admit it, but the moments I spent thinking about her consumed me, each day layering more questions on top of the last. I knew I was a fool for it, but I couldn't stop myself from wondering, what did she mean by rebuilding me? How much of this was just a game to her? Was it just some twisted form of studying, as she had put it, or was there something more beneath the surface? I stood in the middle of my apartment, staring at the same device she'd left me with weeks ago, still blinking in the corner. She hadn't called me since our last encounter. There had been no messages, no cryptic notes. I was left to stew in silence, and it only made this situation worse. Suddenly, the device beeped again, its red light flashing faster now, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I grabbed it, almost too eagerly, and pressed the screen. Her voice echoed through the room, calm as always but with an undercurrent of something darker. "You're still alive, then?" she said, her tone almost teasing. "Good." I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "I want to see how far you'll go, Leo." Her voice turned colder. "You're still hesitant, aren't you? You don't trust me." "Of course I don't trust you," I snapped. "How can I? You're not even human." She chuckled. "That's not the problem, Leo. Trust is never the issue." A chill crawled up my spine. Her words cut too deep, like she was reading into me, figuring me out in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. "Then what is?" I asked, my voice tight. You're the issue." There was no warning, no signal, just the sudden shift in the air that told me she was right there, standing behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I turned, but there she was, taller, more imposing than I remembered, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You've spent weeks circling around the problem, Leo," she continued, her voice dripping with an edge I hadn't heard before. "You're not scared of me. You're scared of yourself." I froze. It was the truth. The worst part of it was that I knew she was right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about her, about this, it had been unraveling me slowly, piece by piece. It was like she was pulling threads from my core, threads I didn't know existed, and now they were fraying, exposing things I wasn't ready to face. "You think you're weak," she went on, stepping closer, her presence suffocating. "You think I'm the thing you have to fear." "I don't fear you," I spat, even though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a specimen, her gaze unblinking. "You should fear yourself, Leo. What you could become, that is what terrifies you." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I was too busy trying to keep myself from falling apart in front of her. "Tell me what you want." My voice cracked, the words raw and desperate. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as though trying to decide just how much to give away. Then, without a word, she stepped back, her presence momentarily lifting from the air. "I want you to see yourself for what you are," she said, her tone quieter now, almost softer. "To feel it, Leo. To understand it." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I don't understand." "Then I'll show you." Before I could react, she moved with a speed that was almost too quick to track, her hand snapping out to grip my wrist. She yanked me toward her, and in that instant, the world tilted on its axis. The air around us thickened, the pressure building as I found myself pinned against her chest, her warmth radiating through the fabric of my shirt. "I'm going to show you something," she whispered, her lips brushing my ear. "Something you didn't know you had inside you." Her voice was low, and it stirred something deep within me, something primal I didn't know existed. I tried to pull away, but she was stronger than I could have ever anticipated. Her grip tightened, almost possessive, as she held me in place. "Don't fight it," she said, her words a command. But that was the thing. I didn't want to fight it anymore. I didn't want to pull away. The temptation was too strong, and as much as I hated it, part of me wanted her to break me, wanted her to take everything I was and twist it into something new. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat thundering in my ears. She was right. I was afraid of what she could make me into, of what I could become under her influence. But it was more than that. It was the fear of losing myself. The fear that if I let her in, if I let her mold me, I might never get back to who I was before. And yet I stayed there, feeling the tension between us, the pull of something I couldn't name. "You don't know what you're doing," I said, barely above a whisper. "Oh, but I do," she replied, her breath warm against my skin. "I know exactly what I'm doing. And so do you." She let go of my wrist then, the absence of her touch leaving me dizzy, unbalanced. I stumbled back, but she was already walking away, her every step purposeful, calculated. "I'm giving you a choice," she called over her shoulder. Embrace what you are, Leo. Embrace what I've shown you. And just like that, she was gone. The silence that followed her departure felt deafening, and I realized something that hit me harder than anything she'd said or done. I wasn't afraid of what she could make me into. I was afraid of what I was willing to become. And I wasn't sure I could stop it. The sound of the door closing behind her was like a gunshot. The silence that followed felt suffocating, but it was the kind of silence that gives way to introspection, to choices that I had been avoiding for far too long. I stood there in the center of the room, my pulse racing, heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream. To shout for her to come back and finish whatever twisted game she was playing. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the weight of my own thoughts. Her words echoed in my mind, biting at the edges of my consciousness, refusing to be ignored. Embrace what you are. I clenched my fists, the memory of her touch still burning on my skin. It felt like a brand, marking me with an identity I hadn't asked for. And yet, despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface, there was something else, something darker and deeper, that I couldn't deny. There was a part of me that wanted to embrace it. Whatever it was. Something in me responded to her challenge, something raw and untamed that I had no control over. The fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing I felt. There was longing, too. A hunger I didn't understand, but that I wanted to explore, even if it meant losing myself in the process. I exhaled sharply, trying to ground myself, to think rationally. I had to focus. I couldn't let her get to me like this. Not again. But the truth was, I was already lost. The second she stepped into my life, she'd thrown everything I knew into chaos, and I hadn't been able to stop it. Maybe I didn't want to stop it. God, what is wrong with me? I paced the apartment, hands raking through my hair as the questions spiraled. I was spiraling. There was no denying it. She had me in her grip, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to break free anymore. The thought of her, of us, clung to me, suffocating me with every passing minute. She had shown me something. No, she had awakened something within me, something primal, something far too dangerous. I knew it. But what was I supposed to do with it? I had no answers. No direction. Just as I was about to collapse into the couch, the device she'd left me with buzzed again, its red light blinking furiously. I stared at it for a moment before grabbing it, almost reflexively, like my hand had a mind of its own. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, her face unreadable, her gaze piercing through the screen, as though she were standing in front of me. Her eyes softened for a brief moment before hardening again. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low, almost coaxing. I didn't respond immediately, too lost in the storm of my thoughts. But she wasn't waiting for an answer. "I know you have," she continued. "The doubt. The fear. But also, the curiosity." I swallowed hard. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how far she'd already burrowed beneath my skin. "What are you doing to me?" I finally asked, my voice strained, desperate for some kind of clarity. She tilted her head, almost like she was studying me. "What am I doing to you, Leo? Or what are you doing to yourself?" My eyes narrowed. "I don't understand what you want from me." "What I want is irrelevant," she said, her voice colder now, but still so soothing. "What you want, that's what matters." I wanted to shout at her. I wanted to scream that this was all madness. That I couldn't play her game anymore. But the truth was, her presence had me on the edge of something dangerous, something exciting. "I don't want this," I muttered, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The screen flickered again, and this time, she leaned forward, her face filling the screen, almost as if she were right there in front of me. Her eyes gleamed with a mixture of mischief and something deeper, something more dangerous. "You don't get to decide, Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You never did." The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her, speechless. Something in me recoiled, but another part of me burned with an intense need to understand her, to understand us. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. You know exactly what I'm saying. The connection was abruptly cut off, and the screen went black. I dropped the device, my hands shaking. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't breathe. She was right. I had no control over this. God, what did I just agree to? The fear and the longing tangled together in my chest, knotting tighter with every passing second. I needed to make a choice. I had to. Because if I didn't, I'd lose myself to this madness. I ran my hands through my hair, pacing the room again. She was right. I had been afraid of what I might become under her influence. But I was more afraid of losing myself, of not knowing who I was anymore. Every time I looked at her, I felt like I was staring into the abyss, one I wasn't sure I could escape from. But could I even want to escape anymore? I stopped pacing. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind whirling. I had to face it. This wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about desire. The desire to give in. The desire to be reborn. And yet, was I ready for that? There was no going back now. The door to my apartment opened with a soft click. I turned, my breath caught in my throat, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her gaze intense and unreadable. You've made your choice, she said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. I didn't speak. I couldn't. All I could do was step forward. And as I did, the space between us seemed to close, her presence overwhelming me as if she were pulling me into the void. It was too late. The choice had been made. And now, there was no escape.